Yeah, perfect. There we go. Good morning, everyone. Thank you all very much for being here today. It's great to see so many people live in person. I think this is the first time I've seen this large of a group in about 2.5 years. You see this large of a group more regularly. Yeah. But welcome to everybody who's here in person, and welcome to everybody who's watching online. Great to have you all with us here today. Thanks to the State of the Net team for giving me this opportunity to be here this morning with all of you and for this Fireside Chat with Representative McCaul. Congressman McCaul, who's the chair of the Congressional Internet Caucus, is very familiar to all of you in tech policy circles. Since he came to Congress, he's been working on these issues very, very actively, from internet policy to cybersecurity policy. He is a force to be reckoned with on a regular basis, representing the 10th Congressional District, which stretches from Austin to the Houston suburbs. At the start of the 116th Congress, Congressman McCaul became the Republican leader of the House Foreign Affairs Committee after leading the House Homeland Security Committee. That's where we got to know each other. We do a lot of Homeland Security work at my firm, and him being such a leading voice on cyber is kind of a natural affinity for us. In his capacity as the committee's Republican leader, Representative McCaul demonstrates an unwavering commitment to international engagement with our allies, countering the aggressive policies of our adversaries, and advancing stability and democracy around the world.
I'm doing a great job.
Doing a great job of it today. It's a super exciting time, so very timely to have him here with us today on all those issues. Additionally, all of us in the tech community know him for his leadership as co-founder and co-chair of the Congressional High Tech Caucus and the Cybersecurity Caucus, both of which provide him the ability to enhance Texas's role as a global leader on technology. So let's get right into it. Got some questions for you, and we'll go from there. So, Congressman McCaul, you've been around technology issues, particularly cybersecurity, throughout your tenure in Congress, and you're clearly a thought leader in this space. One of the issues you've consistently talked about is the need to adopt international cybersecurity norms that would govern behavior by nations around the world. Can you talk a little bit about why you think this is such an important issue and how you're working with your colleagues in Congress and folks in the Biden administration to advance global cyber norms?
Yeah, and thanks, Andrew. And thanks to everybody for having me. It's great to be here. If I could just maybe step back and why I think this is the last piece of the puzzle. About 15 or so years ago, we looked at the federal government. We thought, okay, who's going to have what role? I mean, who's going to defend the nation? Who's going to be offensive? Who's going to share information with the private sector? And there were debates. You had the DIB, the industrial base pilot program at NSA, and there was some thinking that maybe NSA was the perfect place to warehouse the intersection with the private sector to share threat information and to the civilian side and the private sector. And then a guy named Snowden came around, kind of messed that idea up a little bit. We really thought the Department of Homeland Security seemed to be the best place because it was a civilian agency to interface with the private sector, share threat information, and protect the systems. The problem was at that time, it was not the capability was the issue. And I know we'll get into CISA later, but to stand up CISA authorized into law and see where it's come since back in the day when it wasn't as capable, I think you would agree. But I think now it's at a much better place. So offensive, obviously, Department of Defense, NSA, stands up domestically in a time of war, have great offensive capability. Defense has always been, the challenge, the struggle. But the missing piece that we have yet to really tackle, and I have my Cyber Diplomacy Act within the State Department, and State is actually standing this up as my bill languishes in the Senate, which unfortunately that happens a lot in Congress. Everything languishes in the Senate, and they don't really do a whole lot. So it's sitting over there. But this is where we really have, and I think what's happening right now demonstrates the need for this. International norms and standards. I co-chaired the CSIS report back in the day, and it was at that time most downloaded report. But there's no definition of cyber warfare. No norm standards. We could be, working with our allies on this, this piece. And I just throw out as a question to the audience, as we look at the current conflict, and we know Russia has great cyber capabilities offensively, and they've been attacking, particularly the Baltics. Estonia gets, and I've been there many times. As we look at what's happening right now with NATO and Article 5, if tanks rolled into Poland or into Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, we would certainly throw the red flag down and say that's a violation of Article 5, and therefore triggers a NATO full retaliation, attack against one, and attack against all. And then we would be in a World War III, which we're trying to avoid. That's if, he talks about his nuclear weapons, right? Clearly. But if you get into the cyber element, what if today he had a very destructive attack, not just in Ukraine, but in a NATO country? What is the proportionate response? Does that trigger Article 5? It raises all sorts of issues that we, to this day, are still ill-prepared for. And so I guess it was a long-winded answer, but that's why this last piece, which we still haven't finished yet, and it's kind of exciting. We did the other stuff, but this is really the last piece of the puzzle that we're trying to put together as it impacts international norms and standards. Private sector cannot hack back. That's illegal. Although I talked to a lot of companies that would love to do that. That is the role of the Fed. We don't want a Wild West, everybody shooting their guns off. So we need rules of the road, but we need to know what is a proportionate response back. Once you do the attribution, and you know where it's coming from, then I would say we've had too many red lines. Remember ransomware attack on Colonial, and then we put some red lines up, and then they get crossed again. And it's just like the father of five. If you don't have consequences of bad behavior, guess what? Bad behavior continues. It's a very simple concept. We don't have that. And they hit with impunity. Russia, China, Iran, North Korea. And I would argue that our response to this day has not been adequate. And the consequences have not had certainty to stop the bad behavior. So therefore, the bad behavior continues. And that's precisely, Andrew, where we find ourselves today.
It's, as you look kind of at across your time here in Congress and the time where you came here and the time we are now, your tenure here coincides with tremendous advancements in technology, right? And a lot of that is kind of what you're reflecting on now. Is like we've had new and different things, kinetic versus cyber, or combinations of kinetic and cyber. And we also have kind of evolutions in technology. When you first came here, we lived largely in an on-premises software world. Now we live in a cloud-first world, and companies are transitioning to cloud applications. How do you see that? How do you see that policy evolving as well to one where our cybersecurity policies keeping up with the transition to the cloud? Are our cybersecurity policies still based more in a kind of on-premise software world? How do you think about this and look across your time here in Congress?
Well, I mean, it's just like when the internet came out and nobody really, a lot of people didn't understand it. And it's, technology is neutral, but it can be used by for good or bad purposes. And the cloud has a very good security feature to it. We are worried. There's in the EU has a law that's very parochial that would stop basically it's punitive to our companies, while at the same time very friendly to China and Russia. So we sent a letter to the president, bipartisan, that we need to address this legislation that the EU is looking at. I think, given the current events, they're going to walk back that legislation. at least I would hope so. But that's the cloud is. It's here. It's now. Just like cryptocurrency. I know we were going to talk a little bit about that. I was on a panel with the Treasury Secretary Mnuchin at the Milken Institute. I know just about enough to be dangerous on cryptocurrency. Milken is like, the wizard expert. But one thing is clear, and it's the same thing, like crypto can be used for good or bad purposes. Blockchain is really the stability. But imagine right now if Russia had its own digital currency. Would these sanctions have any impact? No. China in the future. China's working on its own, as you know, the yuan, its own digital yuan. Iran, another good example. But I think the Russian example is most pertinent. If they had their own digital currency, talking about SWIFT, it really makes SWIFT outdated. But yet it's going to happen, just like the internet happened. And we got to be prepared for this. And what are the ramifications of digital currency, and what would be the ramifications of countries having their own digital currency? Because I think that is going to be the wave of the future. And I argue, and Mnuchin as well, that the United States has to lead, and we need to set the rules again, rules of the road on this, and we need to start working on our own digital currency.
I mean, I think you can, everyone's saying how much the pandemic sped along the transition to cloud technologies and to new technologies so that people could work remotely. And as you look at what's happening right now in terms of Russia and Ukraine and European reaction and United States reaction, you could see a world in which countries who see themselves as adversaries to Western countries look at things like SWIFT and cutting off other financial tools and say, okay, what do we need to start doing now to modernize our systems, our technologies, in order to take that off the table, right, for Western countries? And that is a significant challenge, right? Because it does take a long-held traditional tool for the United States and Western governments off the table. And it's going to require people to think more interestingly, right? What are the next set of tools that you use if bad actors do things, but they've moved to a digital
and what sanctions would be effective with digital currency? Because it's basically a movement away from like central banks and financial institutions to more digital. And of course, all the sanctions right now are on the banks, oligarchs, Putin himself, and we have some export controls, which I think we're going to talk about in a minute.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about this move to the cloud. And as more and more companies and countries have moved to the cloud, you've seen lots of countries, China, Russia, the European Union, push data localization, right? Yep. Keep data here, requirements that data be housed locally, but companies that provide cloud services rely on the free movement of data around the world, which is obviously very contrary to that. How do you think about kind of what we should do from a policy perspective to fight back against this move to data localization? And how does this impact cybersecurity, knowing that obviously the free flow of information in a cybersecurity world requires data to move too, and that's the only way kind of what's happening from a signals perspective, right? And and you can detect things. So how do you see the data localization impacting kind of cybersecurity?
Well, I think the cloud can provide actually more security if it's done right. And it was designed to share the free flow of information, as you said, but yet we're seeing countries, like I mentioned this bill in the EU, that we are sent this letter to the president urging him to take action, that would localize the cloud to only the EU, and you couldn't have this free flow of information, which really kind of defeats the purpose in large part for why the cloud was invented in the first place. So that's the danger, right? So we don't want countries starting, having their own cloud that has no interconnectivity to the international world.
So I'm going to shift gears on you a little bit to an issue that is on top of mind for a lot of folks, or has been top of mind for a lot of folks until I guess the last few days: semiconductors. You've been an outspoken voice on the need to do more from a U.S. government perspective to enhance our ability to manufacture, design, and produce semiconductor chips here. Obviously, your congressional district is one that houses lots of technology companies. As you look at kind of the semiconductor environment and what's happening congressionally, how do you see this issue resolving itself? How do you see the kind of the House and the Senate coming together to resolve differences in their bills around funding for semiconductors? And how are constituents of yours, companies in your district, talking to you about the need for the United States to lead in the semiconductor space?
Before COVID, if you said supply chain, nobody would know what you're talking about, nor would they care until they held up their medical. They corner 85% of rare earth minerals that they get through Belt and Road. And when I say they, I'm talking about China, out of Africa, Latin America. But then the semiconductor piece, to me, is the most critical right now. 90% of the advanced semiconductor chips are manufactured in Taiwan. So I talked to then Secretary Pompeo and Wilbur Ross and then National Security Advisor O'Brien about how can we manufacture more of this here or with our allied countries. We have to get it away from communist China where it's vulnerable because we know that the Chinese are trying to infiltrate in Taiwan and infiltrate TSMC. So that is what led to the sort of, the expansion, if you will, of TSMC in Arizona was based on that premise. But we had to provide incentives for them to do this. So we took that idea and I introduced the Chips for America Act. Senator Cornyn introduced the companion. Doris Matsui, my Democrat colleague, I found after 9 terms, if you're not willing to work across the aisle, you're not going to get anything done. Because legislation, that's just the way it works. And then, we've garnered a lot of bipartisan support. Everybody from Schumer to, McCarthy to Pelosi. And everyone likes the idea of, well, hey, if we incentivize manufacturers to relocate into the United States, that not only creates jobs and opportunities and investment in the United States, but it's also a national security piece. Chips are in everything, as you all know, from your phone to our most advanced weapon systems. And if they're compromised, and we know that our foreign adversaries would like to, or stolen, then we have a real problem. Since we got this bill authorized on the National Defense Authorization Bill, and since that time, you've seen enormous investment in the United States. Now, we're not finished yet, but Samsung in my district expanded $17 billion. Intel, $20 billion. Micron's looking at $100 to $150 billion investment here in the United States. And there aren't very many of these companies, but where they are, they're looking at, but they're CEOs, they have shareholders, they need certainty that this idea is going to actually work. So I could maybe talk too long on this, but I got a call from the Secretary of Commerce saying, hey, really like your CHIPS bill. Can we just pass that thing on its own, a clean bill? I said, that would be great. It'd be great for the country in America, not just Republicans, great for the administration to get a victory. Then like Congress does best, we screwed it up. So they put all this other poison pill stuff in, like $8 billion to a UN climate fund that could go to China where they manufacture batteries and solar panels in the Xinjiang province where they commit genocide. So it didn't seem like that was very good policy to me to muck up this CHIPS bill with all this other stuff. So here's where we are now. We're doing what's called a conference committee. We haven't done one of these in a while. You must have worked on the Hill. So the Senate actually I don't normally applaud the Senate. They did a pretty good job. They passed my CHIPS bill, and then what's called the Endless Frontiers, which is a heavy investment in research and development, and everything from National Science Foundation to DARPA. If we're going to compete with China, that's putting $1 trillion in its digital economy, that's everything from AI to 5G to quantum, you name it. They just shot a hypersonic off that we didn't think they had, but they do. Circled the world and landed with precision with a nuclear payload. And we don't have that, and we can't stop it because it maneuvers. So we're behind. We have to compete is the point. And that's the point of this bill. My bill on the semiconductor manufacturing side, and then a heavy investment in research and development to not catch up, but just compete primarily with globally with the great competition of our generation, and that is against communist China. Long term, they're the greatest national security threat to the United States. So that's why this bill is so important. So I'll be on a conference committee, and we're going to try to strip all this stuff, poison pills, out of from the House side, merge it with the Senate, and then it goes House, Senate to the president. The White House likes. I was in the Oval Office with the President Biden, and there were 8 of us, half of us tech, half auto manufacturer members, and he said, "This is great. I wish every meeting I have was like this," because everyone supports it. And that's why I'm optimistic it will get over the finish line, because there is so much support for it, from Schumer to the president, from Pelosi to McCarthy. And when we do, you're already seeing the investment, but you're going to see an explosion of investment. We also have a multinational piece to it for our allies as well. I don't care as long as we're manufacturing this in places where it's not vulnerable to IP theft being stolen, which they know how to do very well.
I think the multinational piece of that has garnered great attention, particularly in Europe. Right, is something that the United States wants to do in collaboration with allied countries, and makes good sense, and is something that we should push forward.
Since the introduction of our bill, we're seeing European countries introducing the same thing. So we're, in a way, it's a global competition all the way around. But if it's with our allies, that's where it needs to be.
Let's stay on this China theme for a minute, because you've been spending a lot of time for the last year and a half as part of the China task force that you've got with a bunch of your colleagues in the House, looking at these issues of kind of U.S. technological superiority, U.S. technological kind of challenges vis-a-vis China, U.S. industrial policy vis-a-vis China. How do you see kind of this kind of great power competition shaping up with the U.S. and China, and what should Congress's role be in order to advance policies that help the United States stay on or maintain or get a better footing when it comes to competing with China and other countries like that?
Yeah, great question. So I chaired this China task force. We came out with like 400 recommendations, mostly bipartisan, many of which have passed. But the Chips for America Act was the number one recommendation. But we also, there's a panoply of issues, but the overarching goal is to be more competitive, because we're not. We're not in Africa. We're losing in South America. Indo-Pacific, we need economic alliances like with trade, and we need to, but when it comes to competing with China, they invest huge amounts of capital in research and development. And this is why I think, this bill that I was talking about, it's imperative that we pass it to be, more competitive, or they're going to start going ahead, just like with the hypersonic weapon, that now we're trying to catch up, to them. Huawei, they're installing that all over. The Belt and Road Initiative is brilliant. They are very, very clever. Under the UN, they're a developing nation. So what does that mean? They qualify for almost interest-free loans from the World Bank. that they can then turn around and loan to truly developing nations at a usurious interest rate, get them into a debt trap, take their rare earth minerals, put their own workers in, and then, hey, we want that port or that military base. This is happening throughout the Indo-Pacific, Africa, Latin America. and we're finally waking up. And I think COVID, we woke up to some extent. Not to digress, I'll make this really fast. In 1997, I was a federal prosecutor here, and I prosecuted this guy, Johnny Chung. And he led us to the director of Chinese intelligence, China Aerospace, putting money in his Hong Kong bank account to put in the presidential election. And why? Two things. They wanted the dual-use technology and the satellites, and they wanted to get in the WTO, and they got both of those. And since that time, they have progressed tremendously, in that space. They're in space, by the way. That's why we created the Space Force. So they are, their technology capabilities, and this will get to the heart of your question. We gave them a lot back in the day, and we tried to bring them in the family of nations. I talked to Secretary Baker. He goes, we tried. We wanted them to be more of a democracy and, capitalism and bring them in the family of nations. And, he said it just didn't work. And so we gave them a lot. What we didn't give them, they stole. There's a reason why the Houston consulate was shut down, because they were stealing all this IP from our universities, our Texas Medical Center, NASA. And then I would say what they haven't stolen, we sell to them. If you look at the hypersonic, a lot of that's built on the backbone of American technology. And so this gets me into what we call the Export Control Act, which is under Foreign Affairs jurisdiction. In fact, we're doing some of these sanctions against Russia right now on semiconductors. There are these entities list. Department of Commerce has one. Department of Defense has one. But they're not the same. DOD's is more security. Commerce is more, industry. So you look at this this Bureau of Industry and Security within Commerce. We got this information, and I was able to make it public, that just in the last year alone, only 1% of the export licenses were denied, and that $60 billion was going into China from the United States to invest in Huawei. $40 billion into China to invest in SMIC, which is their semiconductor company. So why are we doing this? We want to marry the list. So these are entities that would go straight to the PLA, straight into their military apparatus. Now, some of it's civil military fusion, but these are companies that if you invest in there, you're investing in China's military program that's going to turn right back at us. So we have to, in my judgment, and this is not going to be an easy thing to do, navigating through all this, but we have to stop exporting this technology to our adversary that uses it to build its war machine that they're turning against us. And you don't think President Xi's looking at Taiwan right now with Putin and what he's doing in Ukraine? I'm worried that the next shoe is going to be Xi, because he's always wanted Taiwan. He sees weakness. And if he goes into Taiwan, and you got the South China Sea, it's very strategic. But what else, as I mentioned before, 90% of our advanced semiconductor chip manufacturing. So this is going to be a really interesting, the next Congress, stay tuned, because we're going to get, hopefully do some big things that are going to, at the end of the day, protect American companies and our technology and our national security.
All right, so I'd like to end this session on a little bit of a different note by having you talk about one of your colleagues, a member that you've worked a lot with over the years, Jim Langevin, who's announced he won't be seeking re-election this fall. You and he have worked together on countless cybersecurity issues, over the years. You and he have formed a great bipartisan duo on a lot of these matters as it relates to DHS and security issues and technology issues. Talk a little bit about kind of your work with him over the years and what you think his departure is going to mean for congressional cybersecurity policy leadership and kind of who maybe you see as kind of the next generation on the Democratic side where you can team up with some folks.
Yeah. Well, first, you're making me feel kind of old. I mean, I'd wake up and I'm like, this is my 9th term. I never thought, but it kind of symbolizes the passing of an era. We wrote that CSIS report, 15 years ago, before it was cool to be in cyber. I mean, now everybody talks about cyber, and with some really talented people, but there's something missing today that is wrong. That I think hopefully we'll be able to fix it for the American people. And it's this intense political division that goes beyond a debate on policy, but rather you're an enemy and you're an evil, bad person, right? If you're on the other side of the aisle. And it's on both sides. You have extremities on both my side of the aisle and from the left and the right. But it hurts the body politic. The way the founding fathers set this up was compromise was necessary to get anything done. Today, it's a dirty word. If I went back home to my district and said, what I'm most proud of is I got ranked by the Lugar Institute as and Georgetown, most effective Republican. You know why? Because I'm bipartisan. But you know what? If I went home to my base and told them that, they'd probably throw me out of office. Like, we didn't elect you to get along with you need to fight. Okay, we have plenty of fights, but we also have to get things done. And the only way you get things done is, hey, I've got a great idea on breach notification, right? Who am I going to go to? I can go to one of my side of the aisle, but if I really want it to pass, it's got to be bipartisan. And so I go to Jim. And he's just a fantastic guy. He's not an ideologue. He's very policy driven. He loves cybersecurity, the issue. I'm going to miss him a lot because I think he's irreplaceable, to answer your question. But I think there are a lot of younger members now that they understand this stuff a lot better than when I first got elected. But beyond the issue of cyber, I think is just the damage to, the institution. And I hope, we can repair some of that damage in the years to come and get back to some decency. Chairman Meeks and I don't agree on everything, but we're pragmatic, and we basically have an understanding. Like, look, you're not going to agree with everything I want to do, and vice versa. But it's like when I just came out of Israel, right? They put 10 parties together in the Knesset. I mean, can you imagine that? And I said, how'd you do that? They said, well, we realize that we agree actually on 70% of the issues. It's the 30% that we fight over. And so they have this bond between all these different parties. We'll see how that goes. But that's probably reflective, of the Congress. We probably agree on cyber. That's almost a 100% issue. But we probably agree on 70%. It's that 30% that you probably see on television or being debated in public. But anyway, the chairman and I, we can agree to disagree, but we can do so with civility. And we don't have to be disrespectful of each other. I disagree with their views, but I respect that. I think they're misguided, but I respect that. And I'm not going to throw a temper tantrum and start yelling and screaming, which I think is very immature-ish. And you see a lot of members do that now, and they go on TV, to get attention, or social media has changed politics forever. And they'll go on YouTube and rant and rave, and you know what? They get a lot of clicks, and they raise a lot of money off it. but they don't give a darn about getting anything done in the Congress. I don't care. I didn't get elected to go on social media or YouTube and, rant and rave. I got elected to get things done. And I hope that we start to get some of that back,
Well, that's a great way to end this session. Thank you very much for doing it. I've asked everyone to please join me in thanking the Congressman for being here today. Thank you, sir, for doing it. Appreciate it.
Yeah, appreciate you. Well done.
Good job. Thank you.